So welcome, everybody. Thank you all for being here this evening. We appreciate you coming. We think these programs are really beneficial for everybody, and the conversations we have are really enriching. So for this evening, we have Leveraging Age-Related Diversity on Volunteer Boards, and that is with our featured speaker, Colin Seitz. I think I just said your name wrong, even though I said it right the first time.
You got it right. You got it right. Awesome.
Okay. So Colin is an expert in all things organizational development and leadership. He's also an he's a certified coach with the International Coaching Federation, and he is the founder owner of ACC Consulting, correct?
Intrinsic Development Group.
Intrinsic Development Group.
ACC was the certification from the
Okay.
ICF.
Okay. And so Colin is going to lead us in a conversation tonight about leveraging age-related diversity on volunteer boards. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Janine. It's a pleasure to be with you all tonight. Good evening. It's so nice to see all these faces, all the screens and everything on. And so we'll get started in just a minute. I'll bring my screen up to share. But just to give you an idea of how I like to do these things and do all my trainings, I really love the participation. So I'm going to really be leaning on a lot of you to share your experiences, to share your ideas, your thoughts. Certainly we're going to look to leverage our collective experience and intelligence of this group, right? We're going to learn a lot by bringing these different voices in and these different perspectives, things that we've seen, maybe some experiences that we've had, good or bad. So certainly we'll have some opportunities for that. And as I'm going, if any of you have any questions or want to add anything in, please feel free. Hey, Colin, can we stop here for a second? I get something I wanted to add in, or I got a question. Or you could always raise your hand in the chat feature as well. So any of those things work. Janine, if maybe I can count on you. If you see a hand go up in the chat feature, just maybe call it out for me in case I don't see it. Before we get started, anybody have any questions about what Janine shared about me? Anything at all before we get started? Awesome. Let me bring up my screen and we will get going. So first thing first, everybody, can you see my screen? It should have a really big picture of me that's been heavily photoshopped, generations at work, all that good stuff. All right, so I had this on here. I didn't know we would have a present, opening slide, so I'm going to move right past that. So I want to go into our agenda. How are we going to use our time tonight? So we'll go through our welcome, which we were just going through, and we'll review our agenda, which we're doing right now. Then we'll talk a little bit about our group norms and making mistakes around learning. We'll talk then about assumptions, valuing age diversity, inclusion, and then we'll close out if we have time with a closing reflection. So we'll talk real quick. What are our goals and what are our objectives for tonight's session? So our goal, to strengthen awareness around the importance of age-related diversity, as well as collaboratively and individually understand behaviors and practices to leverage age-related diversity on the Temple Alumni Association board. So our objectives, and the way to think about this, if we achieve these objectives, we'll meet that goal. So our objectives, as a group, identify the importance of age-related diversity, understand how to navigate some of the challenges that age-related diversity introduces, understand how to invite and leverage age-related diversity, and collaboratively and individually create at least one action step you will take forward with you to leverage age-related diversity within the board. So our roles, I'm the facilitator. I'm going to guide our discussion and create opportunities for participants to share, and you, the participants, I invite you to share your thoughts and experiences. So our working agreements. This is a learning environment. Take some risks, share some ideas and thoughts, and ask questions. So I want to stress that learning environment piece, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in just a second. But a learning environment means we make mistakes, but it also means we have to make room for learning new things. We have to set aside maybe some beliefs that we have in order to make room for some of these new ideas. So I invite you to come in, have an open mind with things, but be gentle with each other, be open to each other trying things, to experimenting with things. And certainly as we leave here today, if we're talking about creating some action steps, be mindful of that. Be mindful of your colleagues that may be trying to, work on some new behaviors or maybe break some bad behaviors and how that comes out. So I said, we're going to talk about making mistakes. And if we're learning, we're definitely going to make mistakes. It just happens, right? None of us learned how to ride a bike by kind of watching someone else doing or reading about it, right? We had to throw a leg over it and start pedaling. And eventually we fell off and we skinned the knee, right? Everybody kind of makes their little mistakes. And so importantly, when we think about that, I want to talk about well-intentioned mistakes. And certainly this comes up in all kinds of different training. We talk about maybe leadership and someone wants to be a better listener. Maybe we make some mistakes with that. But frequently with DEI work, this is a really tough issue, these well-intentioned mistakes. In fact, I hear this a lot when you're talking about people with DEI work. They say, I really want to try some stuff out, but I don't want to make well-intentioned mistakes. I'm really afraid of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing because it's a sensitive subject, right? This is much more sensitive than maybe being a poor listener or, maybe delegating ineffectively. There's a lot of things that are connected, some emotions, some feelings. There's some long-held trauma that are connected to some of these things. So it's important that we talk about how we're going to go forward if we make well-intentioned mistakes as this group. And importantly, what we come up with here, some of these norms that we talk about here are certainly things that you can use, you can take back to your teams, you can implement, and certainly with your board outside of this class, how you can use to work through some of these things. So let me stop sharing my screen a little bit. We'll open this up for our group here. And let's have a little bit of a conversation around this. How do we want to show up? How do we want to respond if somebody makes a well-intentioned mistake, maybe around what we're talking about today, or maybe next week when we get together and we're talking about things and maybe somebody says the wrong thing by accident?
I always like to assume good intent, especially with working with volunteers and colleagues. Just assume good intent. Good attempt.
Yeah, thank you, Shana. And did I say that right? Is it Shana?
It's Shauna.
Shauna, thank you, Shauna. It's important that I get your names right. So please, if I say it wrong, please correct me. Anyone else? So I hear positive intent. Assume positive intent. Anyone else?
I always go with like no shame, no blame, no guilt. So if somebody even makes a mistake or says something crazy, like not like blasting them for it or really like making them feel bad for that error, and instead kind of coming from a place of like objectivity and just trying to still get that lesson across. That way you can still have like a civil conversation.
Thanks, Cameron. Anyone else? And we're really defining how we're going to respond to each other. So, if one of us makes a mistake, or maybe if I make a mistake, right, we're all learning. We're continuing to learn. As leaders, we continue to learn, and we learn, people say mistakes are the teachers, and that's what generates experience. So we're going to make mistakes. How do we want to respond to each other if we do make a mistake?
I think having a welcoming environment where we can ask questions and understand maybe where the mistake or the error started or kind of was sparked, and how we can address that so that hopefully going forward that same mistake may be mitigated.
Yeah, thanks, Kath. I think that's a great point you just mentioned. I'll reiterate that. So that way that mistake is mitigated. Because if we don't address that mistake, it's going to happen again, right? If someone doesn't realize that they did something to upset someone, especially if it's unintentional, it's going to happen again. And then that if somebody was upset the first time it happened, the second time it happened, it's certainly going to be upset. One, because there's that gap between when it happened and nothing happened, nobody said anything, and you kind of build up this idea in your head. I know where they said this, and then it happens again. So it's really important to address these things when they happen. Anyone else? Anything else? Yeah, Jack. Jack, and then Emma.
Sure. So a lot of echoing what others have mentioned, but one thing that always comes to my mind is how can you as well set the stage for what's going to come up. So if it's going to be a challenging conversation, like saying up front, like this may be a challenging conversation, bear with me, I may get things wrong, I may misunderstand or misspeak on things like that, but then open it up to say, like, validate, like if you feel like what I said is, you're picking up something different, like tell me for that. So create, set the stage for people to feel comfortable to then say, like, no, Jack, like what you said actually is a little offensive, and it would be better if you said it this way or that. So then you kind of remove the personality, I feel, and more about like, this is the objective. Actually, we're aiming here to learn.
Yeah, Jack, and I think seeing the comments are setting the stage exactly. It's kind of like laying out the framework and the intentions, right? It's kind of saying this is where we're coming from and this is our intention. Emma, I think you had your hand raised next.
Yeah, just like having an environment of transparency and being able to like have those hard conversations amongst the board, because I work with the board of volunteers, and I know one of my battles in the beginning was being able to have difficult conversations. So I know that being able to like Jack said, be able to set the stage and set the platform for being able to have those difficult conversations and being able to have those transparency moments is where you really set the stage. Like he said, I love that. Thank you, Jack. But setting the stage for being able to have those difficult conversations, and that in turns being able to allows us to be able to have those moments where people make mistakes and feel comfortable rather.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Anyone else? Anyone else have anything? Transparency is key, absolutely. Making sure people know where we're coming from and what our intentions are about. Anyone else?
Colin Kaiser here. If I may offer humility coupled with accountability, that if someone names something, that there's a certain amount of humility that we use to lead into, to taking accountability from, to say that, yeah, it is quite possible that I most likely made a mistake there, and this is how I plan to rectify it or move forward with it or something like that. So this side of humility that leads into a certain amount of accountability.
Yeah, so humility and accountability, being okay to say, you know what, I did make a mistake. I didn't mean it that way. Made a mistake here, and owning that mistake. Because we all know what it's like when someone tries to cover over a mistake that everybody knows was a mistake, right? It's not a good look. And the leader loses accountability with that, or credibility, I should say, with that. Thanks, Kaiser. Anyone else? All right, we feel like we're in a good place. So if anyone here, including myself, makes a mistake, we're good and how to work through it and certainly move on. All right. Awesome. So let me go back to sharing my screen and I will bring up our next slide. And so the next thing we'll talk about here is assumptions. And this came up a little bit with what we were just talking about here with our norms, right? Like somebody will say something and we automatically assume maybe this is what they meant, or maybe we assume positive intent. Is anyone familiar with the ladder of inference? Anyone familiar with what this is? Let me just check to make sure I don't see any hands. Okay, and I'll share, I have a short, probably about a 16-minute podcast that we're going to share with you all after. That's going to go into much greater detail about, what this is for those that really want to dig in a little bit deeper. But as a general approach, what the ladder of inference, it was introduced by Chris Argyris, who's a Harvard professor. And what it was is he said that, we commonly will step away from the observable events and start to make assumptions based on the filters and the mental models that we have. And so if you think about a ladder, if you think about on the very ground floor, those are the observable actions we can actually, observe. The conversations that we're in, we can actually challenge an assumption. We can ask what's going on. We can see with our own eyes what's happening. And the further up that ladder we go, the further away from those observable events we get, the more we start to rely on our mental models, our filters, our experiences to make a decision on what we should be focusing on. And this is really key because everyone in here has slightly different life experiences, right? We all have different filters we're going to view things on depending on the experiences that we've had and how that shapes our lives. So if we look at a painting, many of us are going to come away with different things that stand out to us from that painting. And certainly this is no different, right? That's part of the value of having a diverse group is you have all these different perspectives coming together. But because of this and because of the way we're going to process things, it's very easy for us to climb that ladder. And we may see or we may hear something and we may climb that ladder up and we may make a determination, oh, this is what they meant. I know this is what they meant. And the important thing there is we know. Whether it's true or not, we know based on our models, we're telling ourselves, I know this is what they meant. Sometimes, especially when there's emotions involved and the conversations get heated, maybe, the amygdala takes over and we get tunnel vision. So that's even worse than we're convicted that we know exactly what's going on there. But the key here is to take a step down, to climb back down that and start to challenge some of those assumptions. Start asking some questions. I heard you say this. Tell me more. What did you mean by that? And so again, when we were talking about our norms before, we were talking about that. We were talking about, we can start asking questions about what did people really mean with that? What was really meant when they were saying that? What do they really mean by how they're approaching this situation? Why is this important to them? So really challenging those assumptions. Anybody have any questions at all before we move on the ladder of inference? All right. And so we talk a lot about diversity here everywhere. It's like corporate headlines everywhere. Diversity, diversity. We got to have diversity. And, a lot of times it's this big thing. And certainly diversity has been improving across the corporate world. But the other piece of that is inclusion. You can have a diverse group, but if they don't have a voice, you're really losing out on the value of that. You're losing out on these different perspectives. And so diversity provides a seat at the table. Inclusion gives a voice. And I've heard, a lot of different ways this phrase, diversity can give you a seat to the dance. Inclusion gives you an opportunity to dance. But really the message is the same. It's not enough just to have a diverse group. You have to do things to invite those voices in. So this McKinsey study here talking about in 2020 that over 1,000 large organizations, they did a survey and 52% said their diversity climate was positive, 31% said negative. But the other side of that, the inclusion piece, markedly worse, 29% positive, 61% negative. So while they have this diversity around them, they're not leveraging it. They're not getting people's voices in their room. They're not giving them an opportunity to contribute. They're not giving an opportunity to participate. It's essentially a room with a whole bunch of people around a table, and the same people that were talking 10 years ago are still talking now, and no one else has a chance to get a voice in. So when we think about that, inclusion is a necessary ingredient for embracing diversity. So what behaviors, pull this up, what behaviors encourage or create inclusion? Let me stop sharing my screen. Let's have a little conversation around this. And when we start to think about inclusion and we start to think about diversity, what are some behaviors that we can do as the the Alumni Association, or maybe in your regular corporate jobs? What are some of the things that you can do to encourage that inclusion? What are some things that you can do to invite that? Yes, Kathleen.
Asking people what they think about it, asking their opinion, and really listening to their opinion, even though it's wildly different than yours.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yes, Pat.
I think sometimes it's helpful to have, sort of a practice, or like as simple as like a sharing stick. If you want to take it like to very simple terms of, here's a guideline for this person is talking and everyone else is listening, just to help make it more of a level playing field, especially for those who are more comfortable speaking or less comfortable. Just sort of signal like, hey, it's time for this person to speak and everyone else to listen.
Thanks, Pat. Anyone else? So one of the things that we know when we start to have more and more diverse groups is we start to invite new perspectives, and we start to invite different perspectives, right? What are some of the challenges with that? So Kathleen touched on it a little bit. What are some of the challenges with getting these different perspectives into the room? Yes.
There could be less agreement, so it's like longer to come to a consensus because.
Yeah, exactly right. Now you start to get into some task conflict here, where person A says, I think this is the right solution, and person B says, no, I think this is the right solution, and then person C says, well, I think this is the right solution. And now you've got a bunch of different people that are sharing different ideas. How do you work through that? So it really involves a right mindset of, all right, so how are we going to navigate through this? And I'll throw one more thing in here. What about the person who's sitting in the corner who doesn't normally speak up? One, getting them to speak up, but two, getting them to speak up and really sharing what their vision or their perspective is, because a lot of times it's a lot easier to just say what someone else already said, because there's no conflict, right? It makes it a lot easier. It's a lot easier just to kind of go along and get along versus saying, I actually think this might be different. I think I have an idea that might be different here. But the challenge there is that person may have the best idea in the room. How does that land with everyone? Has anybody seen that before? Have anybody seen that work through? Anyone want to share any experiences of how they've seen that play out?
The latter example where, where you're trying to encourage everyone to have their, let's say, own opinion, but share their authentic opinion. I think it goes back to, I think it was Jack, I'm sorry, like setting that stage and saying like, this is the purpose of the meeting. This is why we're all here. And that we do truly want to hear your feedback. And even if it's differing, and it's okay to have a different opinion, maybe that's not the right language, but we want to hear as many voices and thoughts and then take that in and, do with it what you may, but I've seen that setting the stage and say, we may call on you and we hope that that's okay. And we hope that you'll share really how you feel. That has worked in certain situations, like a parent council that I used to work for. So.
Anyone else?
I can comment.
Yes, Christine and then Jack.
Well, you mean
Nicole.
Nicole? Nicole?
Oh, I'm sorry. Christine, I'm sorry. I thought yours lit up. Nicole, please, the floor is yours.
Sort of to what Catherine was saying, I think I've been in situations where you're brainstorming in a group and you sort of write pros and cons on the board, and you actually need to require everybody to give a pro and a con, because it sort of forces people to talk and open up. And I think sometimes writing it on the board and seeing it, for some reason, the visual aspect of it sometimes helps people open up a bit more. But if you require people to give a pro and a con, at some point, there's going to be a lot of silence. It's going to be uncomfortable. That always happens. But then at one point, somebody just breaks through and says what you're already thinking. Because usually the facilitator or the person, you know, who is the head may already have an idea of some pros and cons, but they hold back and they want to see what the group is going to say. And it just takes one person to have a dissenting opinion that they think nobody else will have, and everybody else is like, yes, I agree. So I think sometimes requiring the group to give both sides may help.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. And then I think Christine and then Jack. Christine, did you go to speak before?
I might have. I think I just when Katie was talking about setting the stage, I so think people are afraid of repercussions and being embarrassed, and it holds us back in making progress in these discussions of inclusivity, you know, all around, you know. And I just think it's so important to alleviate people's concerns about making a mistake or getting in trouble, you know. And I you know, I feel that way, and I sometimes think others feel that way. So I'm just agreeing with the, you know, the setting the stage, we're in a safe place, that kind of thing. We've seen, you know, volunteers come together, and we've seen some unpleasant, you know, interactions amongst the volunteers. And, you know, like I said, I think people really do fear embarrassment or worse, you know, getting in trouble, you know, saying the wrong thing and having a reputation, you know. So that's basically what I was, you know.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. And you know, this is kind of, I know for me, and I remember being in middle school and sometimes high school, where people were afraid to say the wrong thing because, you know, you didn't want to be the one with the wrong answer. And that kind of carried over with a lot of the behaviors we see today. People are, to your point, are afraid to say the wrong thing. And so if you can create that environment where, okay, that's a different opinion, we haven't thought about that, and you know, maybe that's what we're going to go with, or all of a sudden, you know, Nicole was saying that somebody says something, all of a sudden was like, yes, that's what I was saying. And it kind of opens the floodgates because they see that it's okay. You know, how we treat each other is really going to set a big example of how that's allowed. Jack.
Yeah, sure, Colin. There are three things that I've experienced or actually have done, depending on, you know, like just like leadership styles and knowing teams, knowing the groups that you're going to be meeting with. So I kind of qualify as like either before, during, or after the session that you may be having. So before the meeting, if I know, and I know the team well enough, what I've done is I would meet with maybe a couple people beforehand that I would know are likely either, you know, they may be quiet or they may need a little more time, just depending on just either thinking capacity or learning capacity, whatever the case may be. But knowing, you know, those people beforehand, and give them a heads up, you know, there's going to be like a pro and con thing, you know, on this. Like, I would appreciate, you know, your contributions to this. So I'm giving you a heads up on this, you know, because we've talked, and I know your thinking capacity is different, you know, from others in terms of being able to think on the spot. So reaching out to people beforehand, I've seen has worked. During the meeting, a couple of things I've experienced is maybe you throw out like a challenge. Whoever is leading the meeting, they may come up with something that might be a little off the wall, just to kind of get like a different reaction from the group that may as well spark, whether it's, you know, some laughter because you throw something that's completely off the wall that would just never work, but it might get people to think and be more comfortable that, well, if the leader is going to throw something wild out there, maybe it's okay for me to throw something out as well too, what my idea is. And then afterwards, it's like, you know, if we haven't captured anything, like, are we kind of in a quick timeline? But maybe it's like, you know, ask the group, like, you know, what did I miss? Am I missing anything here? Like, do we need to capture anything more? And, you know, give people like, you know, maybe another day or so to kind of think about it and get back. So I've seen those three things just in terms of like learning capacity and thinking capacity for how people can contribute and how they can feel included, whether it's like before, during, or after the meeting or, you know, exercise we're having.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. And, you know, one of the things that Adam Grant writes about it in his book, Think Again, he talks about having a challenge network. So when you were talking about that, it kind of came to mind for me, and essentially saying, you know, putting an idea out there and saying, all right, I want all of you to poke holes in this. Everybody try to figure out where this idea is wrong, and getting people to really, I mean, it's okay, then it's almost expected to get that challenge, to get that pushback, to get those different ways of thinking to come out then. And the last thing we talked about a little bit, you know, you get a whole bunch of ideas out there. Well, then what? So it's important that, you know, obviously you can't go with every perspective that's out there, because oftentimes they're going to be maybe contrarian or a little bit different, but it's important to acknowledge them. It's important to acknowledge what people have contributed, maybe why you're not going to be using it, how you're going forward, and the reason why. But make sure you're rewarding people and acknowledging that you heard them, you understood what they're saying. Here's why we're going to go with it, or here's why we're not. So that's an important piece. If we miss that, people are going to stop speaking up. They're not going to take that risk, that reputational risk, that emotional risk of putting themselves out there and maybe saying the wrong thing if it doesn't get acknowledged. So things to keep in mind. Let me pull my slides back up and we'll go ahead and move on here. And so we talk all the time, you know, we see in the news and you know, business articles, and they break generations down into this group doesn't want to work, and this group does this, and this group is afraid of technology, right? Like, we've all heard and seen these things, right? Like, we've been at family events where someone says, I can't figure out the remote. Where's my nephew? He can figure this out. And it's passed off as kind of like a joke, right? But yes, there are differences in generations, but importantly, I wanted to share this slide from Harvard Business Review. And it talks about what different generations are looking for when applying for a job. And note that there are differences, right? There are differences within generations. They've experienced different things. And when we talk about the filters and the models that we have based on our experiences, those things certainly influence them, but notice that they're not that different. So yeah, there is difference, but there's not that much of a difference there. So they're much more alike than we like to think. There's much more alike than we see and hear about. So I wanted to bring that up and kind of use that to frame our ideas here. And it reminded me as we were doing this. So we talk about age-related stereotypes, because we're talking about, you know, different generations at work and leveraging these different generations for the Alumni Association. And so these really come down to two different things: what we think of others and what we think others think of us. And both of these have some pretty significant impacts. So one study found that stereotypes about older people's ability to learn new tasks interfered with the training they received. When trainers believed they were teaching an older person how to do a computer task, they had a lower expectation than when they believed they were teaching a younger person. So I think back a couple years when I was putting this together, and I kind of smiled and I thought back. So my mother had some heart problems, and her heart doctor said, we'd like you to get a device that you can FaceTime on, so that way when these issues come up, you don't need to come into the office. Now, both my parents at this time had a flip phone, and I was in New Jersey, they're in Florida. And so my wife and I were thinking about this, and we said, well, you know, the move is we should get them an iPad. And then the next thought was, how am I going to teach my mom how to use an iPad? My mother was in her mid-70s at that point. She was never, you know, a friend of technology, but, you know, we kind of looked at this and said, this is what we need to do. This is what our doctors need. This is what's best for her. So we did it. We ordered it. It got there, and we spent probably 45 minutes on the phone setting this up. And it was frustrating. But I took a step back and I thought about that. And I thought about the challenges I've had when I've had to go through technical support, when the person I'm speaking with can't see the screen I'm looking at, and I'm having to kind of explain what's going on and why things are working the way they are. And I had a little bit more appreciation for the situation my mother was in. It was learning something completely new. She did eventually figure it out. We ended up FaceTiming and we ended up texting too, which was something that was completely new and I was not expecting at all. And neither one of us had to teach her how to text. She figured it out on her own. And so I share that because my stereotypes of what my mother was able to figure out, what my parents were able to figure out with technology was completely off. It took some time because I was learning something new, but they figured it out. Anyone else have situations similar to that or anything else that has come up like that that they can kind of relate to? I see a couple of heads nodding. Anyone want to share a story about that? I'm trying to do this so I can see if anyone is. I have a limited screen right here because I didn't stop sharing my screen. So if anybody does have anything to share, please jump in.
And I think familiarity is like an important factor there too, right? Like sometimes I find it hard to explain to my parents who are older a new technology, but have an easier time explaining it to my partner's parents who are the same age. But there's, maybe I'm just not as high up on that ladder of inference with people I'm less familiar with. So I think sometimes it's helpful, like, all right, is it better just to engage an outsider in this process or to even try to bring that mindset, right? Like if I didn't know this person, even adjusting for their, the way they identify, just sort of thinking through it in that way.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Anyone else? Anyone else have anything to add?
I can agree. This is Nicole. I can agree with Pat. I think about my grandparents that live, in Florida. And the one thing has been, let's get them an iPad. Let's upgrade their cell phone so they're able to FaceTime and they're able to send text messages and get pictures. And there's a family member that lives there and they always seem to have a hard time explaining things. But if I come into town, they say, hey, can you have someone help so-and-so learn this and do this? And it seems to stick or get through a little better. But I think from personal experience, years ago, I volunteered at a nursing home and I realized then the cycle of life. And when you're young, you need somebody to do everything for you. And there's somebody there to help you. It could be your parent or your guardian, but they have to be patient with you because you're young and you've never used something or you've never tied your shoe, or sometimes it takes 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. The cycle of life is the same. As we age, there are things that we don't know and we have to learn. And so you need somebody to help you, and that may take time. And so for me, just remembering that at one point in life, I've been there and I will probably be there again. So to extend the grace to that individual in the age frame that they're in, because I will probably be there one day. So sometimes it's just really breathing and just remembering that you will be in that situation on the other end. And it may help you alleviate your frustration, which then allows you to just be freer to teach.
Thanks, Nicole. And what do we think about coming into situations and before we even attempt to, in this example, before we even attempt to teach, like the mindset that I had, having this idea that, oh, this is going to be really tough because they're not going to grasp technology. How can we get around, or how can we how can we have awareness of that when we go into something? What's everyone think about that? Is it enough to go into it?
I would say, like not putting restrictions on things, like, using this family example, sometimes you're like, all right, I got 20 minutes to get this done with you, and then we have to go somewhere else. We kind of like put restrictions or parameters on things, but like letting things evolve naturally so they have like the time or space to kind of accomplish things.
And how about checking our assumptions? We can always ask the questions, right? We can always ask about their comfort level with, maybe taking on some of these things, maybe taking on technology, or maybe the other ways around too. As far as, a big thing that may come up is, whether people want to be in person or do things comfortably over Zoom or virtually. I was on an HOA board where some people didn't want to do it virtually just because that was not the way they've always done things before. So kind of checking in and checking those assumptions and seeing where people are at. And on the other side of this, we talk about what we think others think of us. We talked before about that inclusion piece and, feeling that, we have an opportunity to get our voice in the room. So a study showed that people's beliefs about how others think about their age, their meta stereotypes can interfere with their work behavior. Some responded with a sense of challenge, others responded with a sense of threat. Both of these reactions can impact interpersonal behaviors, leading to conflicts such as not getting along with colleagues or keeping to oneself and avoiding interactions with others altogether. So think about that when we talked about that inclusion piece. If we're trying to really get people to get their voices into the room, if people feel that if people feel that others have a negative interpretation of them, or maybe feel that they're too young to contribute, they don't have enough experience here, or maybe they're too old, they have old dated or out of touch connections here. Anybody see any times when things like that show up? Has this happened to any of you here? Have any of you gone into a situation and felt like you felt others discounted you because of your age or experience?
I know some of our volunteer boards, like when new people come on, and if they're younger, there is some friction with people who, who've been on the board longer, who might be older, who might have started like an alumni chapter, for example, that they're more hesitant to taking on ideas from the new board members, new volunteers, because it's, well, we've always done it this way. This is how it works. This is what people in this area like to do. But they don't speak for a whole region. And so it is kind of trying to find like that balance of, listening to people's new ideas, and just because they're younger doesn't mean they're bad ideas, and vice versa. Just because an older alum is giving their input on what has worked in the past doesn't mean it's not wrong, that there is a history that the new person coming in doesn't know that we have tried what you're saying. And so just really being patient, listening, and like you said, checking your assumptions at the door type of thing.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? Anything come up for them? Any ideas? Any experiences they've had where they felt this way? Yes.
This is taking a step back to meetings where we're trying to include older members who can't always come to an in-person meeting. I know that our group needs to try harder to up the level of technology, because some of these hybrid meetings do not work. And it's very sad. There are older members who just sign off because they feel that they're disenfranchised because they can't hear or see what is going on in the live meeting. And that is a big problem that I know our group needs to work harder on.
Thanks, Kathleen. And I want you to hold on to that thought, because we're going to have a slide coming up about things that you as a group can start looking at to address some of these challenges that are coming up here, maybe some ones that we haven't talked about that all of you are maybe aware of. Anyone else? And again, it's tough for me to kind of scroll through and see. So if anyone has anything, please feel free to jump in and it will be yours. All right. I'll pull up my next slide here. So this comes to the question I was just speaking to Kathleen about, is how does age-related diversity connect to the mission of Temple University Alumni Group? And connected with that, what challenges exist when thinking about leveraging age-related diversity? And let me stop sharing my screen so I can see everyone and make sure we're passing the flow around. Yes, Shauna, sorry.
No, it's fine. Well, I just think that one of the things we struggle with is like, our alumni boards are supposed to be reflective of the alumni body. And so obviously that runs the gamut from you 20-year-olds to 90-year-olds. And I do feel a lot of the boards either skew really much older, or some of the boards skew younger. And people, again, I work in chapters, regional chapters. I've heard both ways. People came to an event and it was all young alums and they didn't feel like they fit in, and vice versa. They came to an event and it was all old alums and they felt like, oh, this isn't for me. And then they don't come back to future events. And so I think it's just really important that we work to have like run the gamut in diversity, age-related diversity as well. So that when people can see themselves in the work that we do and feel comfortable.
Yeah, thank you. What else?
I think to Shauna's point too, our alumni association, we have 360,000 living alumni. So, we as staff and volunteers do our best to engage as many people as possible, but it's hard to also, when we talked about taking everybody's opinion and hearing that, and it's difficult to try to see what would engage one person, might not engage another, would engage a subset. So trying to be everything to everyone within the time and constraints that we have. So sometimes that's can be difficult, just understanding exactly what's going to meet the needs of our entire alumni population.
Thanks, Catherine. Anyone else? How about anyone who hasn't got their voice into the room yet? So you see, I just want to read this out from Luke. In the case of Tuya, we do not often engage with the older alumni boards and vice versa. It is important to have an open mind when engaging with people from different generations, regardless of whether they're older or younger than us. Thank you, Luke. Anyone else who hasn't got their voice into the room?
I'd say I think sometimes from an age perspective, like the Temple experience might have been different based on your generational experience. Like it was more of a commuter school, in the past, and now maybe like a more 4-year residential community. So I think people's experience about what Temple was based on their age could be very different.
That's part of the value of that, right? Is getting those different opinions and views and perspectives in and kind of bouncing that off of, this is what was, this is what is, and things like that. Thanks, Michael. Anyone else? Yes, Kathleen. Oh, and I think you're muted, Kathleen.
Right. I think it's important that the younger alumni can be brought gently to respect what the older alumni have built for them. That, within the experience, the educational experience, so many of the scholarships, programs, et cetera, are possible because of donations from older alumni.
Thanks, Kathleen. And Luke, yes. Yeah, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight what Michael just said, because I think especially when it comes to when it comes to like funding or like talking to older alumni about experiences, I think older generations remember campus very differently than younger ones, and even I just graduated 4 years ago, and there's already new buildings, already new experiences, already new things that have happened on campus that didn't occur when I was an undergrad. So it's just something to keep in mind. I mentioned in the chat, but it really does go both ways. And I think I'll just say, to go off what Kathleen just said, I think we the older alumni need to do a this is not in any way a criticism, but I think the older alumni need to do a better job of highlighting that and saying why it is important, because there's a lot of skepticism about donating to like an alumni association or to like for example, like a general fund or Giving Tuesday, because of the debt that has been accrued by younger students and like the student debt crisis. So I think so I think it needs to be better advertised, like why this is important and why current students could use these grants, this grant funding to their advantage, how it benefits them. So
Thanks, Luke. And Janine.
Yeah, kind of, it was but going along kind of what Luke just said and what Mike just said, like, it's not just the campus that looks different, right? Culturally, everything is so different, even from 10 years ago, from Gen X to millennial, like it's so, the experiences are so vastly different, that if all we have in the room is representative of one certain age group that does have the capacity to give, while that's incredibly valuable and incredibly wonderful, we're missing a whole huge chunk of what's actually happening and what people are really experiencing and what these younger generations are going through. And it's not, if we don't get those voices, a diverse amount of voices in the room, we're not going to lead Temple in the direction that it should go, regardless of how much we raise, which is always beneficial. And like Luke said, the kids with all of the debt that they have, the younger generations, they don't understand why they need to donate. So
Yeah.
it's great if the older generations could promote that more.
Janine, I think that the older generations that you're saying do promote things. I've been in a lot of different situations where I'm a scholarship. I created scholarships, and I've been in the scholarship meetings with younger students who are really wonderful and speaking to us. Our 2-year board is at 100% of donations because I'm the development chair for the TUAA. So I see who's giving. I see a lot of sometimes, people that might have the capacity to give aren't, because they're not being re-engaged maybe in the way that's most comfortable with them, in a situation where they might have been commuter students, had dinner with their parents every night and didn't be on campus and have that experience. But there's still a reason that they love Temple and they went to Temple. And I think re-engaging them is really important. And doing that with the young alumni is also so important, because when I speak to any of the young alumni, and I do often, I tell them one thing that's always important is, no matter what you do, you're helping another student in the future. If you can give $20 a year, I gave when I got out of school, and I've given for the last 40 years, with the exception of maybe a year or two while I don't know, we have our children, but pretty much I've given constantly. But I gave because Temple meant something to me, and I made that connection. And when I make that connection with other people, I let them know, you're not giving it because I asked you to, you're giving it because something in Temple is important to you. Like maybe you needed books and you didn't have the money to buy them, or you belong to the Cherry Pantry, or you had tuition mission like I did. And I felt important that I like to lower other kids' debts if at all possible. So I think there's a lot of different ways that we try to connect with them at whatever level they're at and any age. So I don't think of always they're older, they're younger. I mean, I went to a dinner with a man who passed away yesterday. He was like 96. He hosted a dinner every year. I went to his dinner every year. He was the coolest guy. It's just kind of finding people where they're at and listening to them and engaging and speaking to them. And that's all I'm going to say.
Thanks, Lynn. Nicole, I'll give you one more person and then we'll move on to our next slide. Nicole, the floor is yours.
I wanted to echo what Lynn just said. I worked with a independent private school, pre-K through 12. And we've struggled with this issue of how to connect the younger alums, the older alums, and what's important. It's finding something that they loved about the school and reconnecting. It could be, for instance, if you're a resident assistant, you may want to know about all the new dorms on the campus, how things are going. Sometimes you have to spend the time to segment the marketing materials you send out or what you talk about, or maybe you have a newsletter and you highlight different aspects of the campus so that whatever you participated in and you see, oh, there's growth, or they want to build a new a new dorm or something to that effect, that will get people want to donate or give back in some way. So I think what Lynn was saying, I've seen that in action, and that truly works. When you go, I know we have a large number of alumni, but it's the same problem when you have a K through 12 school that's only been around for 150 years, and you have reunions and you have people celebrating their 50th reunion and those celebrating 5 years. You have to find a way to get them back on campus and to do something. Usually it's monetary, but it's what is going to connect with them. And sometimes, like I said, you have to spend the extra time to segment your marketing message.
Thanks, Nicole. So let me bring up my last slide here. And this is really coming together to that action step we were talking about before. So what can you do? And what I would invite you all to do is to think about this. Think about this right now, maybe reflect on this later on tonight, maybe on your drive home. Think about what you can do. What's one thing that you can commit to? We talked about a lot of different things here tonight, challenging our assumptions and inviting different people, different voices in, making people feel comfortable to maybe say the wrong thing, or at least get them feeling comfortable that it's okay to do that. Getting people okay to challenge you, maybe to, do a pro and con board. There's a lot of different things we talked about. What's one thing that you can commit to that's going to help drive forward what we were talking about tonight, to help leverage that age diversity that we have in this group that you want to build more of? And so I'll give you a minute with this, and I think these slides will be available to you, but really think about that. What are some of the things that you can do? What's one thing that you can commit to? And I'll tell you that you'll be much more successful if you grab a peer in this group and share with them what you're going to work on. I'm going to work on doing this. I'm going to try to challenge my assumptions more, because you have someone else that's your accountability partner now. And when you communicate that accountability part to someone else who's your accountability partner, and they give you feedback on that, you're 90% more likely to complete that task. So let me stop sharing my screen right now. And I want to open the floor up to any questions anyone might have before we close out our session with a reflection with the remaining time we have. Anybody have any questions at all? Anything we talked about? All right, so what I'd like to do with the remaining time we have, and it looks like we have about 6 minutes, I'd like to do a quick reflection. And the way this works is, one of you, if I could have a volunteer, one of you would share one thing you're leaving our session with today. It could be one thing that resonated, one thing that came to mind that we didn't even talk about, but one thing that kind of came to mind for you that we're leaving with today. Try to make it about 20 or 30 seconds. And then once you share that, if you can pick someone else that wants to jump in and do the same thing, and we'll continue doing that until our time runs out for this. We'll call that popcorning. And for those that are open to sharing, maybe make it a little easier on people that are going to pick who goes next. Maybe put your hand up so that way you can say who's open for that. So if I could have one volunteer to jump in and get us started, I would love that. Yes, Cameron, please.
Cool. I like hopping on it early. Biggest thing I think you could take away from these things is come from a place of not knowing. Don't assume that anybody can do something. Don't assume anybody can't do something, and make sure that removing that bias of age, right? You see an older person, don't assume that they aren't with technology. My grandma's 86 and she FaceTimed me today. So just making sure that anybody can do anything, and keeping that in mind, and always just come from that place of not assuming anybody can do something.
Thanks.
Am I supposed to popcorn it to somebody?
Yes, please.
Oh, there's a lot of my favorites in this room. It's pretty tough. I saw a hand up. I'll pass it to Katie. She's right under my screen. It was an easy one.
Hi. Sorry, Jack, I'm going to take yours. I really appreciate your comment around maybe giving some pre-homework to some meetings. So making sure that people have this space and time to think about things ahead of the meeting, so that that conversation, everyone is in it with their own opinion, and we can have hopefully an honest conversation, because people have thought about it before. So I'm going to ask my team to hold me accountable to that.
Thanks, Katie. And who would you like to go next? Any volunteers want to throw their hand up?
Shauna.
Thanks. Oh, I think you might be muted.
Sorry,
There you go.
maybe my mouse. I'm going to try to work to actively seek people's opinions. I really like Nicole's suggestion about asking for pros and cons to help get that devil's advocate side of things, and to hopefully help others speak up when it seems like everybody's agreeing on one thing. But so we just really kind of try to be, purposeful in meetings, and actively seek people's opinions, so that hopefully I'm helping the group be more inclusive.
Thank you. And who would you like to go next?
Go to Michael.
Hand up. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, I think just giving people the space to kind of a lot of people talk about, to just recognize that if you are having challenges, conversations, you can kind of embrace that and put it out, and kind of, like Jack said, set the stage for, productive dialogue together.
Thanks, Michael.
I don't see any other hand raised, so I'll choose Chris. There we go.
I think, as staff members, we're often in a position of a facilitator or a quasi facilitator. And I think I can pause more and listen more, rather than be bothered by the silence. Give people a chance, like you did, Colin, give people a chance to speak up, and remind people frequently that they're in a safe space. There's no wrong answers. No one's going to get in trouble, and so forth. So really work hard, not just at setting it up in the beginning, but throughout a session, throughout a meeting. You're in a safe space. Don't forget, and really creating a place of comfort.
Thanks, Chris.
And I will call on Lynn.
Thanks, Lynn. And I think we have
Thanks,
time for
Chris.
one, maybe two more, and then we'll wrap everything up. So Lynn, the floor is yours.
I enjoy speaking with the older people a lot. So whenever, I guess it's kind of for my husband because his family is like a little bit older than mine, his brothers and sisters. And I just think you can learn a whole lot. So I think always being empathetic to someone who might need a little extra time with their technology and stuff. I happen to really like helping them get through the technology because once they get it, they get that big aha moment. And it's so much fun for both of us to figure it out. But I love to just be more patient. And I would probably need to be more patient even with the younger people because they want to dive a lot quickly. And, so maybe I need to be more patient the other way with people who are younger and come with a lot of, fast, rapid fire information. So I could take that away.
Thanks, Lynn. And I think we have time for one more. So whoever you pick will be the last one tonight, and we'll close our session out after that.
Who wants to go? All right, Jack.
I liked Emma had a point earlier that I really was hooked on, which was around transparency. And what came to mind with that is recognizing, I think, who's in the room and who may not be in the room. So I kind of combine thinking of like the transparency and assumptions as well, that we, if we see or we know what the typical group makeup is, and we're recognizing one person may be there, we may be thinking like, well, we may gather enough information, but maybe we're missing an important opinion or opinions because that person couldn't get there for the meeting, and making it clear that we may not have the full picture yet at the moment, but we may be close, but we should still get a few more opinions on things. So I thought that was really good, Emma.
Thanks, Jack. And so it is 8 o'clock. I want to thank all of you for being present here, for your participation, and for being vulnerable and opening up and sharing everything that you're thinking, being okay to talk about these things and really being open and having these conversations. I was amazed at how many things that we're talking about in here in this reflection that were coming from your classmates or the people in here, right? Not necessarily from the material we talked about, but what you're learning from each other. So that's truly great. It was a real privilege being here with you all tonight. I want to thank you again, and thank you all. Have a great night, and maybe we'll see you again soon. Take care, everyone.